For 300 years, humanity lived under the rule of the Vethkai. The Vethkai were a group of alien species who traveled between stars. They had found Earth long ago, back when humans were just starting to build factories and machines. The aliens looked at the small blue planet and decided it belonged to them now. They called Earth a protectorate, which was a nice way of saying they owned it. The Vethkai were not evil in the way they saw themselves. They did not torture humans for fun or destroy cities just because they could. They simply believed that some species were meant to rule and others were meant to serve. Every alien race in the galaxy believed the same thing. Fear was natural, they thought. Weak creatures feared strong creatures. That was how the universe worked, and humans seemed very weak indeed. They had soft skin that cut easily. They got sick from tiny germs. They lived only 80 or 90 years, which was nothing compared to species that lived for centuries. Most importantly, humans were afraid of everything. They feared death. They feared pain. They feared the unknown. The Vethkai scientists wrote many papers about how easy it was to control humans through fear. For 300 years, the humans proved them right. When alien ships flew over their cities, humans hid inside their homes. When the Vethkai demanded food and resources, humans gave them everything they asked for. When the aliens took the smartest humans away to work in distant laboratories, no one tried to stop them. Parents watched their children get loaded onto ships and said nothing. They were too afraid. The aliens did not need many soldiers to keep Earth under control. Fear did most of the work for them. A single patrol ship flying over a city was enough to keep millions of people quiet. The threat of punishment was usually enough. Actual punishment was rarely needed, but the Vethkai made a mistake that would cost them everything. They thought human silence meant human acceptance. They believed that 300 years of obedience meant humans had given up. They did not understand that humans were doing something the aliens had never seen before. Humans were waiting deep inside their hearts. In places no alien scanner could detect, humans were watching and learning. They studied the Vethkai ships that flew overhead. They memorized patrol schedules. They quietly passed knowledge from one generation to the next. Grandparents told grandchildren about the time before the aliens came. They kept hope alive like a tiny flame hidden in cupped hands. Fear kept humans quiet, yes. But fear did not destroy what humans really were. It just made them patient. They were waiting for the right moment. They were waiting for something to change. That moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in what had once been called Argentina. A Vethkai commander named Rethfer was having a bad day. His superiors had criticized his reports. His ship needed repairs he could not afford. A human settlement in his territory had failed to deliver the expected amount of grain. The shortfall was small, barely noticeable in the grand scheme of things. But Rethfer was angry and wanted to make someone pay. He ordered an orbital strike on the city of Buenos Aires. The strike lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, 14 million humans were dead. The city that had stood for centuries was nothing but ash and melted stone. Rethfer filed his report and went to dinner, satisfied that he had taught the humans a lesson about meeting their quotas. He had no idea what he had really done. That night, humans all over the world sat in silence. They had seen cities bombed before. They had lost family members to alien cruelty before. But something about Buenos Aires felt different. Maybe it was the size of the death toll. Maybe it was the pointlessness of the attack. Maybe it was simply that humans had finally reached a breaking point that no one had known existed. In shelters and basements, in hidden rooms and quiet corners, humans looked at each other. They did not speak at first. They did not need to. Something passed between them, a shared understanding that went beyond words. The worst had happened. The thing they had feared most had come to pass. The aliens could kill them at any moment for any reason. There was no safety. There was no way to appease the Vethkai and guarantee survival. They could follow every rule perfectly and still be turned to ash by a commander who was having a bad day. And in that moment of terrible clarity, something broke inside humanity. But it was not their spirit. It was not their will to live. What broke was something else entirely: their fear. When the sun rose the next morning, humans went about their business as they always had. They worked in the fields. They operated the factories. They paid their tributes and bowed their heads when aliens walked past. On the surface, nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Humanity had spent 300 years being afraid. They had let fear control their actions, their choices, their very thoughts. Fear had been their constant companion, their invisible master. But Buenos Aires had shown them a simple truth. Fear could not save them. Obedience could not save them. Nothing could save them except themselves. And once they accepted that truth, once they truly understood it in their bones, the fear simply went away. It did not happen all at once for everyone. It spread slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping across the land. But it spread. Person by person, family by family, community by community. Humans stopped being afraid. The Vethkai would not understand what had happened for a long time. They would watch their carefully built system of control begin to crumble, and they would not know why. They would try fear again and again, each time more confused when it failed to work. But by then, it would be too late. The humans had finally woken up. And a species that is no longer afraid is a very dangerous thing indeed. Ambassador Kethril was one of the oldest and wisest leaders in the Vethkai Dominion. He had overseen a dozen conquered worlds in his long career. He knew how subject species behaved. He knew the signs of rebellion, the whispers of resistance, the small acts of defiance that came before the big ones. He had crushed many uprisings before they could even begin. But what was happening on Earth confused him deeply. 3 months had passed since the destruction of Buenos Aires. In that time, nothing had changed that he could point to. Human tribute shipments still arrived on time. Workers still showed up at their assigned jobs. There were no protests in the streets, no secret meetings detected by surveillance, no coded messages intercepted by intelligence. By every measure the Dominion used, Earth was as obedient as ever. Yet Kethril felt a chill run through his body every time he walked among humans now. Something was different in the way they moved. They no longer hunched their shoulders when he passed. They no longer hurried out of his path with their eyes fixed on the ground. They still obeyed, still followed orders, still did what they were told. But they did it differently. They did it like they were choosing to do it, not because they were afraid of what would happen if they did not. Kethril called a meeting with his advisors. He described what he had observed. The younger officers laughed at his concerns. How could obedient subjects be a problem? So what if they looked at you differently? The important thing was that they still obeyed. But the older officers understood. They had seen what Kethril had seen. And they were worried too. The Dominion decided to test the humans. They increased tribute demands by 20%. On other worlds, such an increase would cause panic and desperate attempts to comply. Humans would work themselves to exhaustion trying to meet impossible quotas, terrified of the punishment that awaited failure. Instead, human representatives calmly informed their overseers that the new quotas could not be met. They did not beg. They did not plead. They did not offer excuses or alternatives. They simply stated the fact and waited to see what would happen next. When threatened with punishment, a human woman named Elena Vega looked directly into the eyes of a Vethkai commander and said, "Then punish us." Her voice was calm. Her hands did not shake. She was not brave in the way that meant fighting against fear. She was something else entirely. She was someone who had simply stopped caring about threats. The commander had her executed publicly, hoping to frighten the other humans back into proper submission. The crowd that watched Elena die did not scream or cry. They did not look away. They stood in silence and watched, their faces empty of fear. When it was over, they went back to work. The Dominion tried harder. They conducted raids on random settlements, dragging people from their homes in the middle of the night. They made examples of anyone who spoke too boldly. They reminded humans, again and again, of the power the Vethkai held over them. Nothing worked. Fear was a tool, and like all tools, it only worked when used on the right material. You could not cut water with scissors. You could not hammer a cloud into shape. And you could not frighten people who had decided they were no longer going to be frightened. While the Dominion struggled to understand what was happening, humans were busy. Not with rebellion, not yet. They were busy building dot in workshops across the planet. Human engineers began working on projects they had only dreamed about before. They designed weapons based on the alien technology they had studied for 3 centuries. They built ships in hidden valleys and deep caves. They trained soldiers in places the Vethkai surveillance could not reach. The strange thing was that they did not really try to hide what they were doing. When Dominion inspectors stumbled upon a weapons factory, the humans inside simply told them the truth. Yes, we are building weapons. Yes, we intend to use them against you. No, we will not stop. The inspectors did not know how to respond. In their experience, subject species either hid their rebellions until they were ready to strike, or they made dramatic announcements meant to inspire their people. They did not calmly admit to treason while continuing to commit it. That was not how conquered species behaved. Kethril sent report after report to the High Council, begging them to take the human threat seriously. The humans are not acting like any species we have encountered before, he wrote. They have stopped trying to appease us. They have stopped trying to hide from us. They are preparing for war openly, and they do not seem to care that we know. The High Council dismissed his concerns. The humans had no fleet. Their weapons were primitive copies of Vethkai technology. They had no allies among the other subject species. Mathematically, they could not win. Therefore, they were not a real threat. The Council did not understand what Kethril was trying to tell them. The humans knew they could not win. They knew the numbers were against them. They knew they would probably die. They simply did not care anymore. Us, species that accepts death, is a species that cannot be controlled. Fear only works on those who want to live at any cost. Humans had discovered something else, something deeper than survival. They had found their dignity again. They had remembered what it meant to be free, even if freedom meant dying. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The preparations continued for 2 more years. Human children learned to fight alongside their parents. Scientists worked through the night to improve their designs. Communities shared everything they had with each other, knowing that private wealth meant nothing in the face of what was coming. When the human leadership finally announced that they were ready, no one cheered. There was no celebration, no war cries, no dramatic speeches about freedom and justice. There was only a quiet determination, shared by billions of people who had all made the same choice. They would rather die standing than live on their knees. And they were about to prove it. The war began on a cold morning in what humans still called December. 300 human ships rose from the surface of Earth and headed toward the nearest Vethkai military station. The ships were ugly things, built from stolen parts and guesswork. Many of them barely held together. Against the sleek warships of the Dominion, they looked like toys. The Vethkai commanders who watched them approach felt something close to pity. These poor creatures, they thought. They are throwing their lives away for nothing. This will be over in an hour. They were wrong. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Dominion had ever seen. When human ships took damage, they did not retreat. When human pilots were surrounded, they did not surrender. When entire squadrons were destroyed, the survivors did not panic or break formation. They simply adjusted their plans and kept fighting. Vethkai captain named Morsheth found himself facing a human vessel that had lost half its crew and most of its weapons. Standard doctrine said the human ship should either surrender or attempt to flee. Instead, it accelerated directly toward his flagship. What are they doing? Morsheth demanded that his tactical officer check the readings twice before answering. They are on a collision course, Captain. They intend to ram us, but that would kill them. Yes, Captain. Morsheth stared at the approaching ship on his view screen. In all his years of warfare, he had never seen a species that would deliberately sacrifice itself in combat. Self-preservation was the most basic instinct. Everything else came second. The human ship struck his vessel at full speed. Morsheth died without ever understanding what kind of enemy he was facing. This pattern repeated across the battlefield. Human commanders did not calculate odds of survival. They calculated how much damage they could inflict before they died. Human soldiers did not fight to live another day. They fought to make sure their deaths meant something. The Dominion lost the first battle, but they did not worry. They had thousands of ships. The humans had only hundreds. This was simple math. Eventually, human numbers would run out and the rebellion would end. But the math did not work the way they expected. Every battle cost the Dominion more than it should have. Human ships that should have been easy targets somehow managed to destroy 2 or 3 Vethkai vessels before going down. Human ground troops held positions that should have fallen in minutes for hours, sometimes days. Human scientists adapted captured technology faster than anyone thought possible, and for every human who died, 2 more seemed to take their place. Volunteers came from every corner of Earth, from every age group, from every walk of life. Old people who could barely walk picked up weapons. Children as young as 12 learned to operate communication systems. Everyone wanted to fight. Everyone had stopped being afraid that the turning point came at a place humans called the Proxima Relay. It was a space station that controlled communications across 6 star systems. The Dominion had stationed a massive fleet there, confident that no enemy could approach it. A human fleet of 50 ships appeared at the edge of the system. Against them stood 500 Vethkai warships. The numbers were impossible. Any sane commander would have retreated immediately. The human fleet advanced. Admiral Vethkai Sorn watched the human ships flying directly into his formation and felt the first real fear of his long life. This was not bravery. This was not desperation. This was something else, something his species had no word for. The human ships did not try to fight the entire fleet. They punched through the outer defenses, accepting terrible losses, and headed straight for the relay itself. 30 ships were destroyed in the first 10 minutes. The remaining 20 kept going. They reached the station with only 8 ships left. Those 8 ships delivered their weapons directly into the relay's core systems. The explosion destroyed the station, crippled the Dominion's command network, and killed thousands of Vethkai officers. Only 2 human ships survived to escape. When Admiral Sorn finally managed to contact the flagship of the human fleet, he demanded to know why they had not retreated when they had the chance. The human who answered was a woman named Commodore Sarah Chun. Her uniform was torn and bloody. Her ship was falling apart around her. But her voice was steady when she spoke. Retreating would require caring whether we lived, she said. We stopped caring about that a long time ago. Your people taught us that there are worse things than dying. The transmission was recorded and spread across the galaxy. Other species heard the words of Commodore Chun. Many of them had been conquered by the Dominion, too. Many of them had been living in fear for centuries, just like the humans had, and many of them began to wonder, If the humans could stop being afraid, maybe they could too. The war continued for 3 more years. The Dominion threw everything they had at humanity. They burned human colonies. They killed human prisoners. They used every weapon in their arsenal. But nothing they did could break the human spirit, because you cannot break what is no longer afraid of being broken. When the Vethkai High Council finally admitted that they could not win, the request for peace talks came as a shock to most of the galaxy. The mighty Dominion, brought low by a species they had considered barely worth noticing. It seemed impossible, but the humans who had fought and bled and died for their freedom were not surprised. They had always known this day would come, not because they believed in destiny or fate, but because they knew something the Vethkai had never understood. Fear is a choice, and once you choose to stop being afraid, nothing in the universe can make you go back. The peace talks were held in the ruins of Buenos Aires. The humans insisted on this location, and the Vethkai were in no position to argue. Where 14 million people had once lived, there was now only gray ash and twisted metal. The wind carried dust that had once been homes, schools, and children. Ambassador Kethrall led the Dominion delegation. He was old now, much older than when he had first started sending his worried reports to the High Council. His warnings had gone unheard for too long. Now he was here to surrender to the species everyone had said could never win. The human representative was a woman named Colonel Amara Okonkwo. She was tall and thin, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She did not smile when the Vethkai arrived. She did not threaten or gloat. She simply sat down across from them and waited. Kethrall had prepared a speech. He had planned to offer various compromises and deals. The Dominion would reduce their demands on human territories. They would give humans more self-governance. They would even allow some human representatives in the council chambers. It was more than any conquered species had ever been offered. Colonel Okonkwo listened to his speech politely. When he finished, she shook her head. "You do not understand," she said. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to tell you what is going to happen." She laid out the human terms in simple, clear language. The Vethkai would leave human space completely. Every soldier, every ship, every official would be gone within 1 year. They would release all human prisoners held across their empire. They would give humans all of their technology, keeping nothing secret. And they would publicly announce that humanity was no longer under Dominion control. Kethrall stared at her. "And what will humanity offer in return?" "We will stop fighting you," Okonkwo said. For now, there was no promise of friendship, no offer of alliance, no pretend forgiveness for 3 centuries of oppression. Just an end to the killing if the Vethkai accepted the terms. If they did not accept, the war would continue until one side was completely destroyed. Kethrall signed the agreement, and afternoon. News of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Other conquered species heard the story and could barely believe it. A young race with primitive technology had defeated the mighty Dominion. They had done it not through superior weapons or secret alliances, but through something far stranger. They had simply stopped being afraid. In the years that followed, humanity expanded beyond Earth. They built new colonies on distant worlds. They constructed ships that could travel between stars. They grew stronger with each passing decade. But they did not become conquerors themselves. This surprised many observers, who expected the former slaves to become the new masters. Instead, humans did something unexpected. They started helping others. When pirates attacked a weak colony world, human ships arrived to defend it. When refugees fled from Dominion territories, humans gave them shelter. When young species struggled to develop their technology, human scientists offered to teach them. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Some alien scholars tried to explain this behavior. Perhaps the humans wanted to build an alliance against future threats. Perhaps they hoped to gain trade advantages. Perhaps they were simply trying to look good while secretly plotting domination. But a few scholars saw something deeper. They noticed that humans who had stopped fearing death had also stopped fearing generosity. They no longer worried about being taken advantage of. They no longer calculated whether kindness would pay off. They simply helped because helping was the right thing to do. Fear, it turned out, had poisoned more than just human courage. It had poisoned their ability to trust, to give, to connect with others. When that fear died, something beautiful grew in its place. 50 years after the war ended, a young HFY historian traveled to Earth. His name was Rethkal, and he had devoted his life to understanding how humanity had achieved the impossible. He interviewed hundreds of humans, read thousands of documents, and studied the ruins of Buenos Aires until he knew every stone. Finally, he requested a meeting with one of the last surviving veterans of the Liberation War. Her name was Maria Santos. She was over 90 years old, with white hair and hands that shook slightly, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Rethkal asked her the question he had traveled so far to answer. How did you do it? How did your species stop being afraid when fear is the most natural thing in the universe? Maria was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the city that had been rebuilt from ashes. She thought about all the friends she had lost, all the battles she had fought, all the years of struggle and sacrifice. Your people taught us something, she said finally. You taught us that fear was supposed to keep us alive. You used our fear against us for 300 years. You thought it made us weak. She turned to look at him directly. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep and settled peace. But you pushed us until we discovered something you never understood. There are worse things than dying. There is living without dignity. There is living without hope. There is living as something less than what you could be. She smiled, and Rethkal saw no trace of the fierce warrior she had once been. He saw only an old woman who had found her way to contentment. Once we understood that, Maria said, fear could not touch us anymore. And that is when we finally became free. Not just free from you. Not just free from you. Free from ourselves. Free from everything that had held us back for so long. Rethkal wrote down her words carefully. He would include them in his book, The Definitive History of the Human Liberation. Scholars across the galaxy would read them and debate their meaning for centuries to come. But for now, in this quiet room with an old human woman, he thought he finally understood. Fear was not what made species survive. Fear was what made them prisoners. And humanity had done something no other species had managed to do. They had escaped.